Welcome to Whispers of History, where the past speaks gently and nothing ever happens in a hurry. If you're here to learn something soothing, slightly strange, and not at all urgent, you're in the right place. Tonight's story is about a profession so quiet, so niche, that it might just lull you to sleep before we're done explaining what it was. Now, temple whistlers, yes, really, they existed in ancient Sri. Now, before your eyelids betray you, gently tap subscribe so you can drift through time with us again. Leave a comment with where you're watching from and what time it is there. I promise, history never judged anyone for being in pajamas. Now let's ease into tonight's journey. You open your eyes to the thick morning air of Anuradhapura, ancient Sri's sacred capital, circa somewhere around 300 BCE, give or take a priest's guess. The dawn light filters through palm leaves lazily, like it too isn't quite awake yet. There's a smell in the air, not incense, not exactly flowers, somewhere in between. A temple scent. The kind that seeps into robes, memories, and sandalwood. You're standing barefoot on stone steps warmed slightly by yesterday's sun. Ahead lies the great monastery, a sprawling complex of curved roofs, bell-shaped stupas, and slow-moving monks in saffron robes. Everything hums, but quietly. Even the birds seem to have signed a non-disruption clause. Now, you are not a monk, not today. Today you're a whistler. Yes, a temple whistler, an official, though not overly celebrated, role. Your job is to produce gentle, rhythmic whistles during morning rituals. Not songs, not tunes. Just the same delicate, breathy note over and over, like wind politely knocking at the divine's door. The idea, it's said, is to keep the gods' attention from wandering, which raises questions. Do deities get bored? Historians still debate whether the whistling had any real theological basis, or whether it was just the ancient version of spiritual white noise. You purse your lips. The first whistle of the day floats out, hovering like a moth. It's an art to not sound too enthusiastic. Whistling with too much flair gets you a side-eye from the elder monks. Whistling off-key, well, there were rumors of one whistler reassigned to coconut fiber duty for that. As a sleepy cat pads across the outer courtyard, you watch as it sits exactly where it shouldn't on the ceremonial rug. No one moves to stop it. Sacred felines have tenure here. Your breath catches on a second whistle. Behind you, a young initiate accidentally knocks a brass bowl off its pedestal. The sound rings across the courtyard like a badly timed gong. No one flinches. It's too early to flinch. The fact of the day, temple whistlers were believed to be spiritually neutral, neither holy nor profane. Just tolerated. You are a sound in the background, like a ceiling fan or a conscience. And here's your obscure tidbit. According to one palm leaf manuscript found in a remote village, temple whistlers were once paid in jackfruit. Yes, not coins, not gold. Just a fruit that's equal parts delicious and dangerous if dropped on your foot. You probably won't make it through this day without thinking, is this job real? And yet here you are, whistling while the world doesn't burn. You move to your next post under the bodhi tree. A soft breeze tugs at your robe. Even the wind is learning to whisper. You walk slowly beneath the spreading branches of the Bodhi tree. It is, after all, the great grand tree of that Bodhi tree, the one under which the Buddha attained enlightenment. This one was supposedly grown from a sapling smuggled here by a princess who looked suspiciously capable of such things. The ground is swept clean, a little too clean in fact. You pass a tired attendant still brushing away invisible dust with a bundle of reeds. "Can't let the gods trip," he mumbles, not looking up. You take your place near the base of the tree. It's quieter here if that's even possible. Somewhere deep within the trunk, time itself has curled up and gone to sleep. You begin your next set of whistles, soft, steady, slightly unsure if it matters. Your audience, a monk with half-closed eyes and a beetle crawling across his knee. Neither seem particularly moved. Today's major historical fact. The Anuradhapura kingdom ran for over 1,000 years and had one of the earliest documented irrigation systems in the world. Meaning, while Europe was still fiddling with aqueducts, Sri was channeling water through gravity-fed wonders so rice paddies could thrive and monks could bathe in style. You, however, are not managing water. You are managing air through lips. And let me tell you, it's harder than it sounds when a fruit bat decides to sneeze overhead. Now for a weird cultural nugget. Temple whistlers, according to one old poem, weren't allowed to chew betel leaf while on duty. It apparently disrupted the tone. One too many exhales and the gods start thinking you're gargling reverence. The scholars still argue whether the whistling was part of a larger soundscape, accompanied by gongs, drums, and recited chants, or whether it was meant to stand alone, like a single thought echoing through a distracted mind. You exhale a quiet whistle that barely escapes. Your lips are dry. You regret not sipping from the communal water pot earlier, even if the ladle had a suspicious chip and an even more suspicious floating leaf. Time drips slowly in this corner of the temple. Occasionally, someone drops a lotus flower at the altar. You hear the petals land, that's how quiet it is. You think about other jobs you could have had. Rice scribe, temple gardener, official monkey chaser. But no, your fate is the steady, soothing hush of a whistle in a world trying not to wake the divine. Though the breeze returns, you adjust your robe, you whistle again. And no one, not even the beetle, seems to mind. You move through the east cloister like a shadow with a purpose. The flagstones beneath your feet are uneven, weathered by centuries of bare soles and occasional rainwater that never seems to fully evaporate. Every step makes a soft sound, fabric against stone, skin against silence. Though the temple stretches in every direction. Not grand, exactly, grandness implies effort. This place is serene, the kind of architecture that looks like it simply grew here and quietly decided to become holy. You pass a group of novices sweeping leaves that fell an hour ago. One of them spots you and mimics a whistle behind your back. You don't look, but your ears catch the tune. It's off-key, deliberately so. A silent war is declared. You round the corner to the incense platform, the place where smoke lives its best life, curling and drifting in slow, purposeful loops. It smells like warm resin and nostalgia. Someone, probably the elderly monk with the uneven mustache, has arranged a circle of mangoes as an offering. 3 are already missing. The temple squirrels are unforgiving and unusually strategic. You take your post near the hanging bronze bell that no one rings during your shift. It's ceremonial, decorative like you, but you're used to that. Being a temple whistler is the sacred version of elevator music, present, polite, and largely ignored unless it stops. Now, today's historical fact whispers through the haze. The temples of ancient Sri weren't just places of worship. They were full-scale economic and social hubs. They housed scholars, treated the sick, trained artisans, managed land, and oversaw waterworks. Think of them as a spiritual university with a really aggressive landscaping department. And here's your oddity. In some temples, particularly far south, whistlers were forbidden from marrying during their service. The idea was that attachments disrupted breath control. Apparently, love makes you wheeze. The scholars still debate whether temple whistlers were chosen for their skill or simply for being unimportant enough not to interrupt the ritual hierarchy. You like to imagine an audition, a panel of monks listening with grim expressions while someone nervously toots through pursed lips. A beetle lands on your sleeve. It lingers, probably mistaking you for something steadier than a human. You let it stay. Your whistle now is slower, more drawn out, nearly fading into the wind. This section of the temple isn't just quiet, it's meditative, as if the stones themselves remember every sound that's ever passed here and decided to only keep the gentle ones. And so you whistle, a soft, invisible ribbon unspooling across time. You're summoned, not dramatically. This isn't a palace and you're not important enough for drama, but summoned nonetheless. A novice waves you over, wide-eyed and whispering like you might explode if spoken to directly. There's a complaint, he mutters, from the inner sanctum. You follow him down a side passage that smells faintly of wet stone and 1,000 years of secrets. The corridor narrows as you go deeper, eventually depositing you into a low-ceilinged room where several senior monks sit around what appears to be a cracked clay model of a stupa. They're frowning at it like it insulted their robes. The one raises a hand. Your tone today, he says slowly, is too happy. You blink. There are no right answers in this conversation. We request moderation in cheer. You nod because what else can you do? Emotionally ambiguous whistling it is. As you leave the room, trying to recalibrate your breathing to existentially neutral, you reflect on this. In the ancient temple hierarchy, tone was everything. Not just in chants and mantras, but in the very presence of sound. Music was rare, melody was sacred, even bells were rung on specific lunar cycles. The idea of tuning your mood to match the moon, that's not metaphor, that was policy. You head toward the meditation grove. It's a patch of earth encircled by stones and shaded by trees that seem to lean inward like gossiping elders. Now here's your historical fact of the hour. Sri's temple complexes were among the first places in the world to implement dedicated meditation gardens. Centuries before such things became fashionable with Western seekers and yoga retreats with. Now for something weird. One 12th century scroll describes a specific punishment for overly dramatic whistlers. They were made to listen to the slowest monk chant the Sermon of Infinite Compassion in full. It's 14 hours long. And no, you may not sleep through it. You begin to whistle again, this time with less joy and more humble apology. A tone that says, I am here but not delighted. It's a fine line to walk. The scholars still argue whether the whistlers ever understood their own power. After all, to shape sound in a place of silence is, in some strange way, to carve space in time. You let out one long, barely audible note. It flutters into the leaves and disappears. So something rustles gently nearby, possibly a monkey, possibly enlightenment. It's unlikely either way. You step into the sun again, the brightness washing over you like warm tea, mild, slightly steamy, and not quite invigorating. The courtyard is full now, not bustling because nothing here bustles, but occupied, hushed foot traffic, whispered rituals. A glacially paced water-pouring ceremony near the lotus pond. Everyone here is doing something with intent, and most of those intents are slow. You head toward the outer rim of the temple grounds, where the bodhi leaves shake slightly like old hands in the breeze. This is your next assigned post, the Pilgrim Gate, a place where visitors come to see, touch, pray, and if they're local, gossip quietly with someone they swear isn't actually their cousin. The stone arch overhead still holds remnants of carvings, twinning lotus petals, celestial beings, and something that might be a lion but looks more like a startled cow. No one dares to fix it. Ancient art, even when vaguely bovine, is still sacred. You plant yourself next to a large granite lantern, now empty of oil but full of wasps. You don't whistle just yet, you wait. The rule, unwritten but known, is that whistling at the wrong time is like laughing at a funeral, technically audible but frowned upon by every generation. And now, today's historical fact. The ancient term for temple whistlers is meaning sound makers of serenity. It's a romantic phrase for what was likely a job given to people who didn't cause trouble but needed something to do. Think of it as spiritual community service, with airflow. Your obscure tidbit, a rare set of copper plates found near included a temple employment roster, and listed one whistler as expelled due to nose whistle interference. The first known recorded case of involuntary nasal harmonics ruining a sacred mood. A group of pilgrims passes through the gate. One older woman leans on a stick shaped like a serpent. She nods to you. Good whistling yesterday, she rasps before continuing on her way. You feel absurdly proud. Validation from a stranger with a snake stick, that's top-tier praise. You begin your whistle, it's gentle, slightly deeper. A breathier tone for the midday hours. You've developed a schedule. Morning whistles are crisp and pure. Afternoon is more relaxed. By dusk, you'll barely be audible like a flute two valleys over. The scholars still argue if temple whistlers worked in shifts or were left to wander and hum as they pleased. One theory suggests they followed the monks. Another insists they orbited the temple like sound satellites. A third suggests rather rudely that nobody paid much attention. Your breath catches on a long whistle that echoes faintly through the columns. Someone claps once. Not for you, probably a ritual, but you take it anyway. A child tries to mimic your whistle, she fails, laughs, runs, you smile into your next note. You're not supposed to interact technically, but smiles don't count. Later, you're at the edge of the temple's sacred pool. A wide basin lined with stone lotus flowers dotting its surface like gentle punctuation marks in a sentence the water's been reciting for centuries. A crane stands near the far side, utterly still. You begin to wonder if it's real. You're assigned here only occasionally. It's a peaceful post, but tricky. The acoustics are complicated. Whistles bounce off water in strange ways. Sometimes they vanish entirely. Other times they return 5 seconds later and confuse the next whistler into thinking someone is mocking him. You sit on a smooth stone worn down by generations of backsides and ceremonial robes. You're not supposed to whistle while seated, but no one's watching, except the crane, and it still hasn't blinked. A historical fact of the day, ancient Sri temples weren't just religious hubs, they were science labs. Astronomers tracked stars from the tops of stupas. Herbalists grew medicine in monastery gardens. Some temples even held primitive libraries where scribes medical, philosophical, and astrological manuscripts onto palm leaves. They were like quiet universities with better landscaping. Your weird tidbit. In one temple ledger written in verse form, a scribe detailed the expenses of hearing a new whistler and included, quite bitterly, that the previous one had stolen 3 mangoes and blamed it on a peacock. There was no peacock. The case remains open. You let a whistle escape across the pool. It skims the water like a pebble tossed by a careful hand. The crane blinks, finally you win. Nearby, 2 monks engage in silent walking meditation. It's less a walk and more a prolonged pause between steps. You wonder if they count each blade of grass they pass. A novice arrives with a small pot of water and offers you a sip. It tastes faintly of clay and rain. You nod in thanks. He nods back like you've shared a life-altering moment. You have not. But it's nice of him to think so. The scholars still debate whether whistling was ever used to signal something, not just presence, but time or mood or warning. Was a slow, descending tone a sign of danger, a sharp trill a call for help? Most agree probably not. But wouldn't that be nice? A secret code in plain breath. You whistle again, lower this time, more reflective. The sound disappears into the breeze, into the leaves, into memory. As under the crane, it takes flight. Without a sound. You're back near the central stupa now, the architectural heart of the temple, a gentle dome rising into the sky like it forgot how to be a mountain. It's painted chalk white, blinding under the sun, with gold finials stacked on top like a divine balancing act. Everyone walks clockwise around it, always clockwise. Even the ants. You tried going the other way once. It did not go unnoticed. The path around the stupa is worn smooth. Sandalwood dust drifts on the breeze, mingling with dried jasmine petals and the faintly roasted scent of someone's lunch 3 courtyards away. You resist the urge to investigate. You have a job, a sonic one. You position yourself on the north side, beneath a frieze of dancing apsaras that look suspiciously like they're mid-gossip. You wonder if the sculptor had opinions. You begin your whistle again, this time with a little more upward tilt. Just a hint of reverence. The kind of tone you'd use if the sky asked you a question and you didn't want to seem rude. Now, today's historical fact, these stupas called in local tradition were often built to enshrine relics. Hair, teeth, bones of the Buddha, yes, but also of revered monks, nuns, and even items like robes or alms bowls. One stupa supposedly holds the left shoulder bone of a lion-hearted disciple. That's either very poetic or very unsettling. Scholars remain understandably unsure. And your curious tidbit, some whistlers, it's said, used to suck on tiny slivers of tamarind wood to keep their lips supple. A natural remedy that also made their breath smell like sour fruit. Not exactly divine, but effective. As a passing monk gives you a glance, not a nod, not a smile, just a look that says acceptable. You bask in the glory of mid-tier approval. You continue your slow pace around the stupa, always clockwise. Always calm. You begin to feel like part of the ritual itself, not a person but emotion, a frequency, a gentle loop of presence. The scholars still debate whether temple whistlers received formal instruction or learned purely through imitation. Some evidence points to apprenticeships, others to spontaneous whistling competitions behind storage sheds. The truth, as always, is somewhere between tradition and boredom. Your feet ache slightly, but your lips are still strong. You whistle again, slightly flatter now to suggest humility. As a bird sings above, you pause respectfully. Even in your field, you know when to yield to a master. It's nearly evening. The light softens, brushing the edges of everything with that golden hue only temples and old cats seem to earn over time. You walk toward the ceremonial platform near the banyan grove, where preparations for the twilight offerings have begun. This is your final post of the day, the most solemn, the most visible. You stand near the stone lions whose faces have been eroded into expressions of mild disapproval. One's missing a tooth, the other appears to be sneezing. Still, they guard the platform like tired aunties, present and alertish. You ready your breath. The dusk whistle is the hardest. It has to be soft enough not to interrupt prayer but firm enough to say, yes, gods, we are still here, even if the wind forgot us for a while. You exhale, a long, mellow sound that floats like incense, curving, lingering, unwilling to leave. Your historical note for this hour. Ancient temple ceremonies often marked time by breath, not bells. Monks would chant in cycles based on how long it took to exhale completely. Some could recite entire verses on a single breath. Others, less impressively, wheezed halfway through. Both were holy. One just needed more naps. And your peculiar tidbit. There is a single surviving carving in depicting a man with puffed cheeks and pursed lips, flanked by two birds. Most believe it's a depiction of a temple whistler mid-performance. Some argue it might be a drunk trying to kiss the wind. Again, scholars remain divided. Your own performance continues. A boy watches you from behind a pillar, imitating your every breath. His cheeks inflate. He tries, he fails, he laughs, you wink. Your whistle never breaks. The platform begins to fill with offering bearers. Women in white saris carrying trays of jasmine, cups of milk, bundles of rice tied with palm leaves. They move like mist. You lower your whistle to a murmur. A final breath, not a farewell. The scholars still debate whether temple whistling had any measurable effect. Did it calm the congregation, soothe the gods, ward off flies? The records are vague. But something about the ritual endured long after the names of kings faded into moss. And as the sun touches the horizon, you let out your last note of the day. It's nearly silence, more suggestion than sound. A sigh shaped into reverence. And then the temple exhales with you. For just a moment, everyone breathes the same quiet. Night folds itself across the temple like a patient shawl, soft, inevitable, and older than any structure still standing. You linger in the quiet hush of post-offering stillness, where no one speaks unless absolutely necessary. Even the bells have finished their part. Now it's the hour of murmured prayers, flickering lamps, and slow retreats to sleeping quarters. You're not expected to whistle now. Your shift has technically ended, but the air still feels unfinished, like a story mid-sentence. So you sit just outside the moonlit boundary of the main courtyard, under a canopy of vines drooping like tired eyebrows. You lift your lips and send one last breath into the world. It barely registers, a ghost of a tone, but it's enough. The dog perks up its ears. A monk across the courtyard raises a single eyebrow. And somewhere in the rafters, a lizard begins to chirp in what you decide is supportive applause. Here's your historical gem. In some of the older temple records, there's mention of night whistlers, a different class entirely. Unlike the daytime whistlers whose job was to maintain serenity, the night whistlers were said to mimic owl calls, or more eerily subtle wind patterns to keep spirits from becoming restless. It's unclear if this was religious, folkloric, or simply an early form of ghost deterrent. As for today's obscure cultural tidbit, a scroll discovered beneath a cracked Buddha statue listed a brief training manual for whistlers. Step 1. Do not whistle too hard near sacred texts, they flutter. Step 2. If you must burp, do it as the drum strikes. Step 3. If possessed, pause whistling until further notice. Practical advice, spiritual flexibility. You lean back against the cool stone wall behind you, feeling every groove carved by centuries of fingers, offerings, and the occasional overzealous squirrel. The scholars still argue whether temple whistling was a serious spiritual duty or a quietly humorous addition to monastic life. The truth is, it was probably both. Sacredness, after all, often sneaks in through the most mundane doorways. A novice walks past you, arms full of spent oil lamps. He says nothing but hums a melody that suspiciously echoes your last whistle. You say nothing either. Imitation in this temple is the form of accidental flattery. Above, stars blink one by one into place. Some cultures see gods in the constellations. Tonight, you see a pattern that looks suspiciously like a mango. You decide that counts. By the time you rise, the temple has returned to its skeletal form. Shadows draped over white walls, empty courtyards, and soft corners of silence too shy to speak. You walk slowly now, barefoot still, your sandals tucked under your arm like an afterthought from a previous life. You pass the wall of sacred etchings, ancient stone carvings worn nearly smooth. They tell the stories of past kings, miraculous rains, talking elephants, and rice that never ran out. It's a curated mythos like all histories. And of course, there's no mention of the whistlers you've checked. You let your fingers drift across the stone. The texture is familiar, reassuring, like the temple itself is saying, yes, I remember you, even if no one else does. Tonight's historical insight. There's record of an annual soundless festival at some rural temples in the 5th century, where for 3 days no music, bells, or chants were allowed, only breathing and footsteps. It was meant to realign the temple with the natural world. During this time, whistlers were often instructed to whistle inward. No one knows exactly what that means. There are theories, most are disappointing. This odd cultural gem, one whistler reportedly used a carved seashell as a sort of primitive amplifier. He'd blow across it during festivals to make a long, ghostly note that echoed across the valley. Locals called him the honker. He's mentioned twice in oral histories and once in a complaint from a startled buffalo herder. You stroll past the empty grain storage huts, the granaries built of clay and wood with roofs shaped like overturned bowls. Monks used to keep ceremonial rice here, grains so old and revered they weren't for eating, just admiring. You wonder if anything is ever truly sacred or just deemed too important to use. A breeze rolls in, tugging lightly at your robe. You let out one last whistle, not because anyone needs it, but because the air feels like it's waiting for it. The sound loops once, then dissolves. The scholars still puzzle over why temple whistling disappeared. Some blame the arrival of new musical instruments. Others suspect a decline in appreciation for nonverbal devotion. Some think silence simply became louder. You round the corner into your tiny sleeping chamber, 3 stone walls, a mat, and a shelf that pretends to be a bed. You lie down, still hearing the echo of your own breath in the back of your throat. Tomorrow you'll whistle again, not for glory, not for history, but because someone has to remind the silence how to hum. Morning begins without fanfare. There is no grand bell, no chorus of chants, no dramatic rooster with a sense of theater. Instead, it begins the way all ancient things do, gradually. The darkness fades until it realizes it's outnumbered by light. You rise from your mat slowly, joints creaking in ways that suggest you might be older than you are. or perhaps just deeply in sync with the temple's own reluctance to fully wake. You splash water on your face from a stone basin outside the chamber. It's cold, bracing, holy maybe, depending on how fast it hits your neck. A small frog watches you from the rim of the basin, unmoved, likely a local, probably with opinions. Your robe is already dusted with last night's silence, and today's breeze is low and suspicious, as if the weather isn't sure whether it's invited. You make your way toward the outer cloister, where you'll begin your first whistle of the new day. Here's your historical thread. Monks in ancient Sri temples followed a time-keeping system based not just on the sun, but on natural cycles of breath and movement. Some monasteries used flower-blooming schedules, others used the migration of bees. In short, watches were out, observant plants were in. And the obscure bit, one temple near the coast recorded that its whistlers were instructed to pause whenever the ocean could be heard. The logic: no need to add breath to the breath of the world. Whether this was mystical reverence or just an excuse to sit and listen to waves is still up for debate. You whistle now, the first tone of the day. It feels unfamiliar for half a second, as if your lips have to remember their purpose. But then the sound flows out, steady, gentle, like nothing ever ended. A pair of crows argue above you in the rafters. One stops, cocking its head, possibly listening, possibly judging. Both are acceptable. You take a slow turn around the cloister path, passing the same mossy pillars as yesterday. Some things in life change. This temple is not one of them. The scholars still debate whether temple whistlers had any written compositions or if the tones were improvised, intuitive, and passed on through breath alone. There are no surviving notations, only echoes. You finish your loop. Someone left a small banana at your post, either an offering or a bribe from a friendly monkey. You accept it. Divine ambiguity tastes sweet. You're summoned again, this time with a slightly more dramatic flourish. A young acolyte runs up to you barefoot, face flushed, breathing like he just outran karma. There's a situation, he wheezes. You sigh. Situations are rarely musical. You follow him across the courtyard, through the old meditation corridor with cracked murals of sky gods and elephants who clearly never skipped trunk day. You arrive at the east wall, where a group of monks have gathered around something suspiciously flat and broken. It's the ceremonial whistle board, a long, lacquered piece of wood used during festivals to hold a row of ceremonial wind instruments, most of which haven't been played since your predecessor tried and passed out mid-festival. Apparently, someone sat on it. I was meditating, says the monk in question, though the cushion under him suggests otherwise. There's debate now should you be issued a replacement tool, perhaps a reed whistle, a conch shell, a bowl to hum into. You quietly suggest you just continue with your mouth as always. They agree. Eventually, with the energy of people who didn't know it was still your job. As they disperse, you let out a long whistle for practice. It travels well here, near the open colonnade, bouncing gently between stone and sunlight. And now, your historical nugget. Temple acoustics in Sri were deliberately designed. Builders used curved walls, open ceilings, and carved lattices to guide sound like a slow river. Some stupas could echo a whisper 12 times before surrendering it to silence. Sound was not just heard, it was stewarded. Your weird detail. In one rare set of letters found in an ancient temple archive, a monk wrote that the whistler's breath seems to summon the wind, or perhaps the wind comes to borrow it. Which is poetic and vaguely creepy, especially considering it was written during a cyclone. You finish your duties near the broken board. A small breeze passes. You whistle into it, not loudly, just enough to suggest, "I'm still here." So somewhere in the rafters, a tile shifts. Whether from age, pigeons, or gods with opinions is of course uncertain. The scholars still debate whether temple whistlers were seen as essential to ritual or simply ritual adjacent. Some temple records categorize them under air handlers, which is either divine or deeply HVAC. You return to your spot near the banyan tree. You sit, you exhale. Well, the sound continues. Because someone must make music where others make memory. Midday again. The sun drapes itself across the temple in broad, lazy strokes, illuminating every crack, leaf, and stubbornly perched crow. It is too warm for ambition and far too bright for drama. Everything around you adopts the attitude of old slippers, worn, soft, necessary. You find yourself under the shade of the temple's watchtower, a squat, rarely used structure with a bell that hasn't rung in decades. It's not a bell tower in the way one imagines from medieval cathedrals. This one is short, unsure of itself, and slightly leaning. If buildings could sigh, this one would. You're here on special assignment today. The elder monk, who smells faintly of turmeric and moss, has decided that your presence brings balance to this forgotten corner of the complex. Which is a kind way of saying no one else wanted this spot. You begin your whistle, carefully timed between the chants echoing from the distant central shrine. You don't want to overlap. That would be like talking during a eulogy, technically possible, spiritually frowned upon. A historical spotlight. Watchtowers in ancient Sri temples were not just for observing intruders. Many were designed for astrological purposes. Monks would climb them on full moons, record celestial movements, and make predictions about everything from rice yields to political transitions. One tower even had a small sundial carved into its floor. It still works, unless pigeons are involved. Now for your cultural oddity. One temple record from the 9th century references a whistler who claimed to alter the behavior of snakes through his pitch. No one believed him until 3 cobras allegedly began attending the morning rituals. A shrine was built, then unceremoniously dismantled when the snakes bit the water bearer. You shift positions slightly. The stone beneath you is hot but not unfriendly. You begin to whistle again, long, low, almost mournful. A tune fit for leaning buildings and half-retired bells. A squirrel watches you from a beam. He tilts his head as if to say, "That note's new." You offer a subtle nod as though you've just debuted a personal masterpiece. The scholars still argue whether whistlers ever composed actual melodies or if all sound was meant to be monotone, like a single thread in a massive, invisible tapestry. The answer, as always, is likely. Depends on the day. Depends on the monk. You finish your phrase and let the breeze carry it down the temple's slope. A bird chirps twice in response. As a duet, brief, beautiful, probably unintentional. As after a modest lunch of rice, jackfruit curry, and what might have been celebratory lentils, you find yourself seated near the temple's small herbal garden. It's a place of odd smells and quiet humming, the domain of monks who speak to plants more often than people. You're not normally stationed here, but today is an exception. A visiting monk from the hill temples has requested a sound bath near the sacred turmeric bush. Apparently, he believes in sonic healing. You do not object. Though the air here is heavy with scent, mint, basil, sandal, and something deeply herbal that probably cures headaches, heartbreak, or unwanted guests. You position yourself beside a wide, flat rock and begin your first whistle. This one is intentional, focused. The kind of breath that says, yes, this is technically medicine. And now, today's historical insight. Sri Temple gardens were often more than decorative. They were full-scale pharmacies. Ancient monks catalogued hundreds of plants with healing properties, and many temples maintained their own apothecaries. Whistling near such spaces wasn't uncommon. It was believed to encourage plant growth, or at least keep the goats away. Your odd detail of the hour. One ancient text notes a whistler who swore that whistling into a hollowed coconut created divine vibrations. He carried it everywhere until the abbot used it for soup. The coconut, not the whistler. You pause, the visiting monk opens one eye and gives you a small nod of approval. He is lying on a mat surrounded by tulsi plants, wearing a wet cloth on his forehead and a look of faint suspicion. You whistle again, slightly more melodic. The mint leaves seem to dance. This could be wind or miracle. The scholars still debate whether sound played a physiological or purely symbolic role in monastic healing. Some say it soothed the mind. Others claim it merely masked the groaning. You whistle one last time and watch a bee hover midair as though considering joining the ritual. Oh, it doesn't. Still the moment hums. The day slouches toward evening again. Everything begins to stretch, shadows, the patience of novices, even time itself. You feel it in your bones. Or perhaps it's just that you've been sitting cross-legged for too long next to a bush with suspiciously sentient basil. You're reassigned once more, this time to the Hall of Stories, a long stone gallery filled with murals of the Jataka tales. Stories of the Buddha's past lives. One wall depicts him as a merchant, the next as a rabbit. There's one where he's a bird sacrificing himself to feed a starving man, and another where he's a very emotionally intelligent elephant. The hall is mostly empty now, save for a few monks sketching the murals for repair work. You nod to them and take your post near a cracked stone lion who looks particularly exhausted by centuries of moral storytelling. Your whistle here must be softer. The walls are too close, too full of narrative. A loud breath could unravel something, so you begin low, round, careful. A sound that doesn't disturb the painted rabbit but does gently affirm its selfless choice. Here's your historical gem. The Hall of Stories wasn't just decorative. In ancient times, it served as both a schoolroom and a performance space. Monks would recite tales from memory, sometimes with gestures, sometimes with props, and very occasionally with small musical accompaniment, flutes, hand drums, and yes, whistlers. You were the background emotion, the subtle underscore, the conscience with lungs. An obscure detail. One temple chronicler wrote that a whistler once got too emotionally involved during a story and began improvising dramatic notes. It caused a novice to weep so loudly the sermon had to be paused. The whistler was reassigned to leaf sweeping. Art has consequences. You let another whistle out, longer this time, with a gentle dip at the end. It echoes down the gallery, curling around the images like an invisible ribbon. You imagine each tale catching the note and wrapping it into their own moment. The scholars still debate whether the temple whistlers ever became attached to particular stories, adjusting their style to match the moral lesson. Some believe they did, while others argue the breath must remain neutral, sound without story. You prefer to believe you're part of the narrative, a gentle narrator with no words, a reminder that sometimes in temples and in life, the message isn't always in what's said. Oh, it's in the sound between sentences. The evening ceremony is beginning again, and this time you're stationed near the outer bathing pools, where monks and pilgrims wash away the sweat of the day and symbolically their attachment to the world. There's no grand ritual here, just slow footsteps, folded robes, and the occasional poorly stifled sneeze. You take a position near the entrance gate, where frangipani trees drop soft white flowers into the water. A visiting elder monk stands waist-deep, eyes closed, arms folded across his chest. He looks serene but also mildly annoyed, like someone trying to remember a dream they left behind. You begin whistling again, slow, rising tones that match the ripples of the water. A pattern forms. Each breath becomes a wave. Each note a stone dropped softly into the pool of now. A historical moment. The bathing pools of ancient Sri temples were feats of engineering. Gravity-fed from distant mountain springs, they were lined with stone channels carved by hand and sealed with tree resin. Monks would often spend hours here, washing, meditating, or floating on their backs contemplating impermanence. Your obscure tidbit, a single inscription from the 7th century refers to a whistler of waters, a temple attendant whose specific job was to create water-themed tones during purification ceremonies. Whether this was done with a flute, shell, or simple breath remains uncertain, but the name stuck. You like to imagine him too, barefoot, dam-probed, slightly winded. You pause briefly between whistles. The sky is deepening now. One lone star dares to appear. A frog croaks in protest or agreement. The monk in the pool opens one eye. You whistle again, this time with a light trill like a bubble popping in the distance. He closes his eye, success. The scholars still debate whether the whistling at water sites was meant for the humans or for the spirits believed to inhabit springs and rivers. Offerings were sometimes left at the water's edge, bowls of rice, coins, or lotus buds. Occasionally, whistlers were instructed to face away while whistling out of respect, though it's unclear for whom or what. You remain there until the last robe is lifted from the water's edge, until the pool stills, until the breath of the temple pauses again. And then once more, you exhale into the silence, and the silence sighs back. It's late evening. The color has drained from the sky, replaced by that soft velvet hue that settles in only when the temple has stopped pretending it's awake. Candles are flickering now, small flames behind clay lips, lining the edge of the prayer paths and illuminating only what they please. You've been given one of the quietest posts yet, the lantern walk. It's not an official part of temple design, just a narrow winding corridor connecting two shrines flanked by short walls and overgrown vines. No one uses it during the day. At night, it becomes a passage for reflection or escape, depending on which monk you ask. Your role here is not listed in any scroll, but someone has decided a whistle should be present. So, like all good traditions, it simply begins. You walk slowly, one step, one breath, one note, then pause. The pattern continues, unspoken and unfailing, like the tides, like habit, like monks complaining about modern sandals. Now, tonight's historical truth: many temples in ancient Sri had hidden corridors, designed not for secrecy but for weather, shade in the midday heat, shelter in monsoon season. These winding paths became spiritual labyrinths. Walking them was a form of meditation. One record even describes a monk who walked the same path for 40 years, never the same step twice. A strange cultural footnote: in a little-known regional temple, there was once a reverse whistler, a practitioner who would inhale, not exhale, to produce a tone. The goal was said to be inward humility. The result was mostly dizziness. He later switched to gardening. You pass a mural at the corridor bend, a painted deity with 7 arms and one suspiciously modern-looking grin. Its gaze follows you as painted eyes tend to do. You whistle again. Low, smooth. The sound spirals and disappears over the wall like incense climbing into secrets. The scholars still argue if certain tones were assigned to certain corridors, like designated moods. The theory is largely unsupported, but the romantic in you hopes it's true, that somewhere, some hallway always required a note that said, "This is the part where you remember everything you forgot." You reach the far end of the path. No applause, no nods, just the soft brushing of night across stone, and that's enough. You're not alone tonight. A small gathering has formed near the temple's western arch. Pilgrims, villagers, and a handful of tired monks have assembled under the pretense of a lunar observation ritual. But everyone knows they're just here for the view. The moon is full, bright enough to write a letter by. ancient enough to have seen this temple when it was still mostly scaffolding and optimism. You're asked to accompany the moonrise with a ceremonial tone. That's the official wording. What they mean is, please do that thing you do, but make it moon-themed. You take your place at the far edge of the crowd where shadows are thick and expectations are thin. You close your eyes, inhale deeply, and then slowly, gently, you release a whistle. As it starts flat, then rises, like the curve of the moon itself lifting over the hills. Another breath, another note, softer, colder. This one's for the light touching old stone, for the moth that mistakes a candle for a home. Now here's your historical anchor. Lunar ceremonies were central to temple life. Sri monks tracked the phases of the moon with remarkable precision, using it to dictate fasting days, planting schedules, festival timings, and ritual cycles. Some stupas were aligned specifically to the moon's position on full nights like this. And here's the wonderfully weird detail. One record from the 4th century BCE describes a monk who attempted to capture moonlight in a bowl. The bowl in question was made of polished silver and placed in the middle of a sacred pond. His theory: moonlight was a kind of sacred water and could be harvested like dew. His nickname became Moon Collector. He was not taken seriously, but his bowl remains in the temple's museum. Labeled experimental vessel. You continue whistling. The sound no longer feels like it belongs to you. It's simply around, echoing lightly in the bones of everyone present. One old woman wipes a tear, whether from emotion or mosquito is irrelevant. The point is she felt something. The scholars still wonder whether temple whistlers on full moon nights played a ritualistic role or simply provided gentle background. But maybe that distinction is flawed. Sometimes is the ritual. You close your part with one final note, a falling whistle like a feather drifting toward the ocean. Well, then you step back. No blows. No thanks. Only the moon, now full and complete, staring down like a silver witness. It's past midnight now. The temple breathes in longer rhythms. The outer lanterns dim themselves through sheer exhaustion. Even the crickets have slowed their tempo, switching from symphony to casual background filler. You, however, are not sleeping. Not yet. The elder monk, the same one who once accused a squirrel of stealing his prayer beads, has requested a night vigil accompaniment, which translated loosely means, you, the sound person, must now help us stay awake without being annoying. The vigil is held in the Chamber of Listening, a circular stone room with a single skylight and acoustics so sharp they once made a sneeze sound like divine thunder. It's where monks sit and do nothing with incredible intensity. They meditate, they chant, they think long, slow thoughts. Your job, whisper in sound. You find your position on a small wooden bench set into the curved wall. It's polished smooth by decades of quiet sitters with nowhere else to be. You take a deep breath and begin. A low whistle, short, faintly curved. You let it roll along the wall like a marble. Tonight's historical fact: listening chambers like this one were designed to amplify stillness. Some were built underground. Others, like this, used a domed ceiling and open skylight to create perfect acoustic reflection. It wasn't about hearing more. It was about hearing less until the slightest noise became profound. It's said one monk once heard a raindrop 3 courtyards away and began weeping. Your obscure tidbit: a temple scroll describes a whistler who once got so comfortable in this chamber he fell asleep mid-tone. The echo of his snores confused the meditating monks for an hour. They claimed to have heard the voice of an unusually tired spirit. No one corrected them. You whistle again, this time with a slight vibrato. It bounces lightly like wind nudging a string. A monk across the room opens one eye not to glare but to acknowledge. That's high praise here. The scholars still debate whether these chambers were reserved for special rituals or just served as sound sanctuaries for overly sensitive monks. But nearly all agree they worked. Even your own heartbeat seems to pause politely in here. The skylight reveals a single bright star. Not the moon, not a planet, just one distant light keeping vigil with you. You whistle again. The note doesn't go far this time, it hovers like a breath caught on a thought. And then the quiet. Everyone listens. Even the walls. When the vigil ends, it doesn't end dramatically. There's no bell, no chant, no grand release of breath. The monks simply rise, bow to nothing in particular, and shuffle quietly out like shadows, politely excusing themselves. You're the last to leave. Of course, the acoustics demand a graceful exit. You tiptoe backward, bow slightly to the room, and whisper a thank you with your final breath. You're not sure who it's for, but gratitude tends to stick like dust on sandals. You step back into the temple's main walkway. It's cooler now. The air has thinned into something contemplative. Even the torches look sleepy. Your next post is self-assigned. There's no schedule this late. Only instinct. So you walk toward the northern outer wall, a rarely used part of the temple complex that faces a grove of tamarind trees and the faint outline of hills beyond. It's beautiful in a lonely kind of way. The wall is cracked in places, repaired with different shades of stone like a patchwork robe. You sit on the edge, your feet dangling just above a bed of ferns. You begin to whistle, not a ritual whistle, not a functional one. This is personal, private. The kind of sound you make not for gods or monks or wandering pilgrims, but for yourself. And here is your historical morsel. Ancient Sri temples weren't always solemn. In fact, many kept space for humor. Records speak of festival days filled with plays, riddles, mimed fables, and comic poetry. Even monks would perform little dramas, satirical, moral, and occasionally absurd. Laughter, they believed, could purify the mind. Not all holiness is quiet. Your obscure cultural delight. There once was a whistler known as Laughing Wind. He was said to make tones so unexpected, so joyfully absurd, that even senior monks had to cover their mouths during ceremony. He was eventually assigned to festival duties, where his comedic timing and strategic offbeat whistling became the stuff of temple legend. You imagine him now, sitting where you are, whistling into the hills, and then maybe laughing at the echo. The scholars still argue whether this northern wall had any spiritual significance or was just a nice place to sit. No inscriptions, no relics, just moss and wind and a very honest sky. You finish your whistle. There's no reply. Just the faint rustle of leaves, a yawning gecko, and the quiet pride of having done something small but steady. Tomorrow you'll return to your usual routes. The corridors, the shrines, the paths where your breath helps shape the atmosphere. But for tonight, this wall belongs to you. And the silence that welcomes you like a friend who never asks why you've come. The morning comes slowly, as it always does, hesitant, deliberate, like someone tiptoeing into a room where everyone else is still asleep. You rise before the temple fully stirs, before the bells, before the first sandals slap the stone floor. There is a stillness to this hour that belongs to no one, yet feels like a gift just for you. Even the birds are whispering. You've chosen to begin your whistle today not from your assigned cloister, but from the tower, a half-finished structure on the western edge of the complex. It was intended to house a grand ceremonial bell, but somewhere during construction, the funds ran out or the monks forgot, or more likely, the senior architect was distracted by enlightenment. And so the tower remains, tall, hollow, echoing, and slightly embarrassed to still exist. You climb the creaky wooden stairs, past cobwebs spun with centuries of patience, until you reach the top platform. From here you can see the entire temple compound. The rising stupas like sleeping elephants, the rows of banyan trees in disciplined silence, and the faint blue haze of the hills in the distance. You begin your whistle, light, airy, a sound that lifts rather than lands. The wind catches it instantly, spinning it outward. Someone below looks up, puzzled. You duck slightly. It's too early for explanations. A historical insight. Unfinished temple structures were surprisingly common. They weren't seen as failures, but as ongoing conversations with the divine, projects meant to humble the ego. One ancient inscription reads, "What is not finished may still be holy." Your odd detail, a forgotten poem from a temple scribe, speaks of a whistler who preferred heights. He'd climb trees, towers, and once a grain silo just to whistle from above. He believed elevation clarified devotion, or maybe he just liked birds. You whistle again, this time a sharper note, playful, like a small prank against gravity. A monkey on a nearby tree flinches. You apologize with your next breaths. The scholars still debate whether altitude had any effect on the spiritual quality of sound. Some claimed that higher places purified tone. Others said whistling above the temple was presumptuous. But then again, humility is tricky when you're surrounded by clouds. You stay a little longer in the tower. The wood creaks under you, the wind plays with your robe, and your breath shapes the morning in invisible spirals. The sun breaks over the eastern stupa, washing the world in gold. You descend quietly, unseen, like the final note of a forgotten hymn. Back on the ground, the temple is alive again. Not loudly, but with the quiet bustle of daily ritual. Robes rustling, chants humming through the stone corridors. the soft splash of water being poured into polished clay bowls. Your next assignment comes without words. A novice simply hands you a slip of bark with the words Southern Archive inked in careful brushstrokes. You nod, pocket the bark, and begin walking. The Southern Archive is less archive and more cave, carved into the hillside long before anyone thought to plant trees on it. It houses manuscripts older than most cities, written on palm leaves so thin and dry they flutter if you even breathe near them, which makes your job here delicate. You step in slowly. The temperature drops immediately along with your heart rate. The archivist, a monk with eyebrows like question marks, waves you toward a side alcove. Softest whistles only, he says. The texts are sensitive. While you nod and begins. A shallow breath, a barely there tone, not a whistle so much as a memory of one. It's meant to guide the scribe's meditation, to keep time while they trace ancient words with reed pens and fingers trained in reverence. A historical note: Sri Temple archives were among the most advanced in South Asia during their time. With entire teams of monks dedicated solely to copying, translating, and preserving sacred texts, many of which have only recently been deciphered. The archives weren't just libraries, they were spiritual banks. Their currency: breath, ink, and time. An odd detail: one scroll describes a moment when a whistler accidentally blew too sharply near a stack of unbound leaves, causing a storm of scripture that took hours to reassemble. He was thereafter nicknamed the Wind Demon, though mostly with affection. You continue your soft accompaniment, keeping your eyes on the scribes. One of them, a young woman with fingers stained in ink and concentration, glances at you. She mouths, "Quieter." You nod, take another breath. This one is so soft even you barely hear it. The scholars still puzzle over the purpose of sound in these archives. Was it meditative support, a timekeeper's tool, or simply a way to keep the scribe from drifting into sleep with her face in the ink pot? The answer, like most things in temples, is probably yes. You whistle one final time. The scribe nods, satisfied. She returns to her work. You leave quietly, your footsteps echoing like reluctant commas. Outside, the wind catches your breath and carries it into the trees. Somewhere, something ancient remembers. It's early afternoon now, the kind of hour where heat doesn't ask permission. It just settles over the temple like a damp shawl. The cicadas have begun their symphony, which sounds less like music and more like a million insects filing paperwork angrily. You tuck yourself under a carved awning near the Temple of Echoes, one of the smaller shrines built for solitary reflection and occasionally minor disagreements between monks who interpret silence differently. Your whistle begins soft to see how it carries. It returns almost instantly, a perfect echo bouncing back from the opposite wall, a bit too perfect. You try again, this time with a curl at the end. The echo repeats you exactly. Oh, it's unsettling. Also so impressive. Possibly haunted. Today's historical insight. The Temple of Echoes, officially named, which translates to Sanctuary for Inner Stillness, was specifically constructed for acoustic experiments by monastic engineers. Long before echolocation became a science, it was considered a spiritual art. Some monks claimed to find enlightenment by listening to their own thoughts reflect back to them in stereo. And now, your odd detail. One set of palm leaf manuscripts from this temple documents a dispute between two monks over whether echoes were divine replies or simply sound bumping into walls. The debate lasted 12 years. No winner was declared. The walls reportedly remained unimpressed. You try again, this time a whistle in a 3-note rise. The echo stumbles slightly. Imperfect, you smile, even the sacred has its off days. A lizard darts across your foot. A monk sneezes 2 courtyards away. The temple breathes in waves of motion that all somehow lead back to stillness. The scholars still debate whether the echo shrine was truly sacred or just an elaborate sound experiment gone too far. One theory suggests it was used to test prayer cadences. Another insists it was a listening room for spirits. A third theory says the builders were just bored. You whistle again, the echo loops back. Not an answer, but a continuation. Not understanding, but acknowledgement. And for now, that's enough. As after a short rest and a surprisingly bitter cup of medicinal tea that claims to balance heat energies and possibly remove joy, you are assigned to accompany the procession of offerings. It is not a grand procession. No trumpets, no drums, just a slow-moving line of devotees carrying bowls of rice, garlands of jasmine, clay lamps, and folded prayers scrawled on bits of coconut husk. Your role, walk beside them and breathe sound into the quiet. The path winds around the outer temple garden, past medicinal herbs, cracked stone Buddha heads arranged under trees, and one rather smug peacock who absolutely knows he's beautiful. Now you begin to whistle in rhythm with the footsteps. One step, one breath, a low ascending note. Is historical moment, these offerings called are older than the temple itself. In ancient times, such processions were the heart of temple economy. Villagers brought food, cloth, oil, even handwritten poetry. Monks in turn offered prayers, teachings, and the comfort of ritual. This was sacred commerce with no price tag, only faith. A curious tidbit, a 10th century poem describes a whistler who led a procession during monsoon season and developed an entire whistle language to signal puddles, leeches, and mud hazards. It was said his rising trill meant watch your step. His descending tone meant too late. Today's walk is dry, the path shaded. Still, the mood is solemn. People are offering not just things but moments, hopes, names of the dead, wishes they dare not speak aloud. You shift your whistle slightly, a warmer tone now deeper in the chest. A sound that says we hear you even when no one replies. As a child walking with her grandmother mimics your whistle. Hers is shrill, bird-like. The old woman scolds her gently, but you glance back and wink. She beams, you return to your task. The scholars still discuss whether whistling in a procession was purely atmospheric or served a ritual function. Some argue it kept spirits aligned. Others say it was to keep monkeys away. Again, the likely answer is both. You reach the final offering point. Each devotee places their item near the stupa. You let out one last long whistle, drawn, slow, tapering off like incense at the bottom of its burn. And as the final bowl is set down, and the garlands rest gently on stone, you step back, not out of reverence, but because the moment now belongs to silence. Late afternoon again. The shadows are growing long and theatrical, stretching themselves across the stone courtyards as if preparing for some understated drama. The temple is in its transitional hour, not quite done with the duties of day, not yet ready for the hush of night. You find yourself seated near the granary shrine, a peculiar building that is part food storage, part spiritual monument, and entirely misunderstood by outsiders. You've been asked to perform a short whistle cycle while the grain inventory is recounted by a very serious monk who does not appreciate exaggeration. "One sack is one sack," he said earlier, glaring at a novice who dared say many. You begin slowly, 3 notes spaced like footsteps in tall grass. The sound doesn't echo here. It's swallowed by burlap sacks and old walls that smell of rice and stored sunlight. Your historical insight today: granary shrines were more than storage. In many temples, the act of preserving food was seen as preserving life not just for monks but for the entire village. These storehouses were considered offerings themselves. The first grain of each harvest was ceremonially blessed. A good harvest meant security. A bad one meant prayers became louder. And the cultural oddity: a single palm leaf record from the 11th century describes a whistler named Saman who claimed he could soothe grain into longevity with the right tone. It's unclear if the rice lived longer, but Saman did receive several thank you mangoes from grateful farmers, which he considered proof. You adjust your breath. The monk counting sacks gives you a slight nod, the kind of nod that implies your sound is neither too disruptive nor too expressive. This is somehow high praise. As a small rat scurries across the floor, you pause mid-whistle. The monk doesn't flinch. You whistle again, this time lower, almost conspiratorial. The rat freezes, then disappears into a crack in the floor. You are not credited for this act of pest control, but in your heart you know. The scholars still argue whether whistling in storage areas served a functional purpose or was merely atmospheric. Some believe it helped keep the mood reverent. Others suspect it was a subtle method of letting the spirits of the grain know they were appreciated. You finish your sequence as the monk ticks off the final sack. He exhales, loudly, deeply, the way only those who just counted 400 identical items can. Now you leave quietly, resisting the urge to whistle your welcome. As twilight begins to dip its fingers into the sky, you are asked to return to one of the oldest parts of the temple, the stone garden of reflections. No one really calls it that out loud, but the name persists in records, like a nickname only the dead still use. It's not a garden in the leafy sense. It's a wide, open courtyard filled with polished boulders and arranged gravel paths. Some stones are carved with ancient symbols. Others are left bare, as if waiting for time itself to finish sculpting them. Your job here is undefined, which is another way of saying do what feels right but don't embarrass anyone. You begin to walk slowly through the stone paths, whistling a single note every 7 steps. The note is mid-range, gentle, with no upward ambition, a sound that simply exists, like the stones, like you. Historical insight. Stone gardens such as these were designed for walking meditation. Every turn, every placement of foot on gravel, every gaze cast toward a weathered rock was meant to still the mind. In some temples, monks walked blindfolded through them to test memory and surrender control. A strange detail from the records. One eccentric monk believed that the stones absorbed sound and that by whistling at each rock he could measure its spiritual content. He claimed one boulder replied to him in a dream and asked for a new location with better sun exposure. That boulder remains in the sunniest corner of the garden. You whistle toward that very stone now. It does not reply, but somehow it seems pleased. The crow lands nearby, watches, tilts its head. You whistle toward it just for fun, it caws back. Not bad. You make a note, potential duet partners. The wind shifts slightly, sending ripples through the gravel. The last light of day slips over the edge of the stupa, brushing the top of your head like a quiet benediction. The scholars still puzzle over the interplay between sound and sacred geometry. Could notes shape thought? Did the breath of a whistler change the meditation of a passerby? Or was it all a graceful placebo? So you continue walking 7 steps. One whistle. 7 steps. Another's. And in that rhythm. In the spaces between sound and silence. You begin to disappear. Not in bodies but in burdens. Until even the stones forget you were ever separate from them. Dusk is almost over. The last fragments of sunlight cling to the tops of trees like stubborn children refusing to come inside. The sky has turned the color of polished copper, and the temple is lit more by memory than flame. You walk slowly toward the sanctum of forgotten offerings, a quiet annex off the eastern corridor. Most people don't even know it's here. The room is small, no windows, just walls made of tightly packed stone, smelling faintly of sandalwood, dust, and something like old gratitude. This is where misplaced, rain-damaged, or simply overlooked offerings are stored. Bowls of cracked fruit, wilted lotus petals, torn prayer flags. Things left with love even if the gods were busy. Tonight, you've decided to whistle here. Not because it's assigned, but because you feel the room has waited long enough. You begin with a slow, descending note. Something soft enough not to disturb the slumber of the petals. You imagine the sound brushing gently across each forgotten item like a final acknowledgement. Your historical moment for this hour, many ancient Sri temples had storage spaces like this. They were never publicized, rarely decorated, and always humble, but they served a sacred function. They honored the imperfect, the almost, the nearly, the we tried. In temple records, they were sometimes called rooms of soft failure. And your strange detail, a 12th century monk wrote a small poem in which he imagined a pile of broken offerings becoming a god of its own, a deity of lost intentions. The god's blessings were subtle, cool breezes, safe dreams, one fewer stone in your sandal. The poem ends with the line, "He listens even when no one speaks." You whistle a few more notes, barely audible. Not a melody. More like breath that learned to stay a little longer. The scholars still debate whether forgotten offerings held any spiritual weight. Were they cancelled prayers, or simply paused ones? One school of thought insists every offering still reaches something, just not necessarily what you expected. You glance down at a bowl filled with dried jasmine and a small coin, the kind no one uses anymore. You whistle once gently. The air doesn't move. But it listens. And that is enough. By nightfall, the temple is no longer a structure, it's a presence. The walls breathe. The stone radiates warmth. The wind is less like weather and more like a whispering archivist, reorganizing forgotten thoughts among the trees. You've made your way to the path of no ends, a circular trail that loops the entire outer edge of the complex. There's no marker to say where it starts, no sign that it ever finishes. It's used by monks in late-night meditation, insomniac pilgrims, and the occasional turtle with unclear motivations. You walk it now alone but not lonely. The moon follows at a respectful distance. With each few steps, you let out a breathy whistle. Sometimes high, sometimes low, depending on the wind and your mood. There are no rules here, only rhythm. In historical spotlight, circular paths were essential parts of early Buddhist monastic design. Known as routes, they were designed for walking meditations and reflective movement. To circle a sacred site was to mirror the cycle of life, birth, aging, death, and the gentle loop of starting again. Your cultural curiosity, one faded mural along this path shows a monk walking the circle with a single goose. They're side by side, both facing left, both appearing equally serene. There is no caption, no explanation. Scholars call it the contemplation fowl. One fringe theory even suggests the goose was the original whistler. You pass that mural now. You whistle toward it lightly, just in case. As the path curves on, you do not count the steps. You do not look for an end. Each note you release becomes its own offering, light enough not to weigh on anyone but real enough to prove you were here. You see another monk in the distance, also walking. You nod in passing but say nothing. Words would feel too sharp. You whistle a final note into the open air. It spins slightly. The wind carries it past the trees. And something, a leaf, a shadow, or maybe the path itself. nods in reply. The scholars still debate if the whistler's presence here served any defined ritual purpose. But the monks insist the path has always had a sound. Whether it comes from lips, wind, or memory, no one can quite say. So you keep walking, not to arrive, just to continue. Somewhere between night and what comes after it, you arrive at the Pavilion of Names. A wide, open hall with carved beams that reach upward like slow, deliberate thoughts. No doors, no idols, just names, thousands of them. Each wall is etched with small, careful inscriptions. Names of those who built the temple, who visited it, who whispered prayers into its stones. Many are written in fading scripts, some are carved with reverent calligraphy. Others, jagged and uneven, were clearly added by unsteady hands. Though the whistlers are not named here, you've looked. But still, you stand at the center of the pavilion, beneath a ceiling that creaks gently, as if remembering things you've never been told. You begin to whistle, a slow tone, then another. You pause between each, giving space for the names to echo them back. You imagine the sound weaving through the letters, filling the cracks where memory leaks out. Today's historical trace. The Pavilion of Names, or it was a tradition in only a few monastic sites. The names weren't for honor or fame, they were simply record. Proof that someone had existed quietly and with intention, that they had come, hoped, prayed, and gone, nothing more, nothing less. An odd fact, in one version of a now-lost scroll, it said that monks used to walk these halls blindfolded, running their fingers across the names, chanting softly as if reading with skin instead of eyes. They believed that doing so let them absorb the stories without needing to know them. One monk swore he once heard the names whispering back. The others let him keep the theory. You walk slowly now, whistling toward each wall. Not directly, just near enough to be heard by the stone. A monk passes behind you and touches a name gently with 2 fingers, as if checking to see if it's still warm. The scholars still debate the significance of this place. Some believe the names were mere inventory. Others call them a library of intentions. One scholar argued that the names were prayers disguised as people. So you keep whistling, each note is a call. So none demand an answer. While the names say nothing. And somehow that feels like grace. There's only one more place left tonight. Not because it was assigned, but because your feet have carried you there so many times they now go on their own. The upper terrace, the highest natural point of the temple complex. Technically out of bounds after dark. Spiritually negotiable. You climb slowly. The path is narrow, carved into rock and edged by lanterns long burned out. There are no railings, only trust and very old sandals. As at the top you can see everything. The stupas lit like sleepy giants, the tree canopies shifting gently like dreams in mid-thought, the winding footpaths still echoing with daytime footsteps. Above you, stars bright, unapologetic, quiet. This is where the old whistlers used to go when they weren't sure if their work mattered. It's not written down, you just know. The way stone knows your weight. You begin to whistle, not for ritual, not for reflection, but for release. The first note is raw. The second is steadier. The third carries farther than you expected, possibly catching a gust of wind headed toward the hills. A historical moment, upper terraces in temples were places of synthesis. Not public, not quite private. Monks came here to resolve difficult thoughts, to recite forbidden chants, or simply to be above the noise of reverence. It was a place for silence, but not always for peace. This unusual footnote, one aging temple record tells of a monk who believed that each sound created here reached the celestial edge. He claimed the gods only listened from above and that lower sounds had to climb. He built a flute with 7 holes but used only one to keep the divine from being overwhelmed. His name was never recorded, just the flute. It's still in the archives, labeled Unplayed Questions. You take a seat at the edge of the terrace. The stone is cool, your breath fogs slightly. You whistle again, this time upward, toward nothing, toward everything. Far below, the temple shifts into deeper sleep. A candle gutters out. A cat settles under a banyan tree. Somewhere, a novice dreams of mangoes and incorrect chants. The scholars still wonder whether the whistlers knew the value of their role, or whether they simply breathed into silence because someone asked them to. You lie back now. Not tired. Not waiting. Just being. And in the space where your last whistle fades. The sky holds still. Just long enough to seem like it's listening. The dawn doesn't arrive with drama. It slips in like an apology, soft, pink, slightly hesitant. A thin mist floats over the courtyards below, coiling lazily around pillars, wrapping the feet of statues, and veiling the sleeping stupas in something that feels closer to memory than weather. You're still at the upper terrace, lying on the stone, watching the world stretch itself awake. A few monks have begun their first chants of the day. The sound drifts upward like smoke, faint, melodic, full of the kind of patience that only comes with years of repetitive holiness. You sit up, your robe is damp from the stone, but your breath is warm. You whistle a single note into the morning air. It doesn't go far. The mist swallows it gently, like a friend who knows your secrets and keeps them. A historical fact, mornings on terraces like this were often reserved for sunrise meditations, rituals not meant to invoke the divine but to observe it, to bear witness to the world as it resets. In some records, whistlers were asked to make the first sound of the day. It was a symbolic breath offered before anyone else dared speak. A cultural detail. In one northern temple, the first whistler of the day wore a tiny anklet of bells, not for sound, but so others knew when to pause and let the first breath pass. The bells were so small, their sound could only be heard if you were standing very close. One monk described the experience as like overhearing a thought. You rise slowly, brushing dust from your robe. You begin your descent, taking the narrow path down in long, careful steps. The temple stirs beneath you now, monks lighting lamps, sweeping leaves, checking on the stillness of yesterday's silence. As you pass a courtyard, a novice offers you a small bowl of rice and milk. You accept it with a nod, sit on the stone ledge, and eat quietly while the sun begins to outline everything in soft gold. Now you don't whistle now, not yet. The world is still speaking in light. And sometimes sound must wait its turn. Now, scholars still discuss whether the morning tones were sacred in themselves or merely ritual placeholders. One theory suggests that morning whistling was a form of invitation to the divine, to the day, to awareness itself. Now you finish your bowl, you look up, you whistle one note, just once. Oh, and then the day begins. You've been assigned an unusual task, accompany the meditation. It's a ritual practiced only in this temple and only on certain days, specifically the third day after the full moon when no gongs, drums, bells, or chants are permitted. Only walking, only breath, only your sound. The group is already assembled in the rain courtyard, a wide square open to the sky, framed by 4 massive columns and a single bodhi tree in the center. The courtyard is designed to flood during monsoons, its stone floor sloped ever so slightly toward the center, where a circular drain sits like a forgotten pupil. Today it is dry, but it remembers. You take your place at the far end. 12 monks, one by one, begin walking in slow, deliberate circles around the bodhi tree. Each step is measured, not choreographed, just mindful. A kind of walking that could take all day and still not reach anywhere in particular. Now you start to whistle, the tone must be flat, round, no flourish. And not because of a rule, all because of a mood. A historical note, the meditation was born from necessity, once, centuries ago, during a long war when even the sound of a temple bell could attract danger. Silence became survival. Over time, that silence became ritual. It was said that the gods understood quiet devotion even better than loud praise. Your odd gem, one monk recorded that during a particularly intense day, a whistler's breath accidentally mimicked the mating call of a jungle owl. Within minutes, 5 owls had perched on the temple roof. The meditation was paused. The owls stayed for an hour. No one considered it a disruption, only an unexpected form of participation. You change your pitch slightly, adjusting to the footsteps. The sounds aren't musical exactly, but there is a rhythm now, a cadence between footfall and breath, between movement and stillness. A leaf drops from the bodhi tree. It lands silently. One of the monks smiles. You whistle again, this time slower. No one speaks, but everyone hears you. The scholars still debate whether rituals like these were acts of faith or acts of rebellion. Rituals designed to reassert the temple's autonomy during times of political uncertainty. But for the monks here today, it seems simpler than that. So they walk, while you breathe, and the tree listens. The sun is high now, almost directly overhead, flattening shadows and softening colors until the entire temple seems made of bleached silence. Most activity has slowed. Monks move indoors. Animals curl under stairwells. Even the birds keep their commentary to a minimum, as if even flight requires a nap. But not you, not today. You've volunteered for a quiet post. Volunteered being a flexible term when the elder monk gives you a look that means, this will be good for your character. You are posted at the outer wall of wishes, an ancient perimeter ledge where visitors quietly tie small cloth knots, string beads, or leave fragments of poems scratched into wood. The wall stretches for hundreds of feet along the temple's southern boundary, past the last stupa and into an old grove of neem and sal trees. The knots are of every color: faded crimson, turmeric yellow, herbal green. Some are embroidered. Others are just torn fabric, tied by people who had no offerings, only hope. You begin to walk slowly along the wall, whistling one clear note every few paces. Each tone is different, responding not to rhythm or ritual but to what's tied there. A short, trembling whistle for a knot that's nearly unraveled. A long, slow one for a verse etched so faintly it can only be read in the right light. Historical insight. The outer wall of wishes has no official name in temple records, but it appears in traveler diaries as early as the 5th century CE. One Chinese pilgrim wrote of a prayer fence where the wind reads what the heart cannot say. Some believe these were battlefield offerings left by those who survived. Others claim the wall marks the path taken by a monk who once walked backward for 7 years to undo every mistake. A curious detail. In one fading scroll, a whistler is described walking the wall blindfolded, using only sound to locate where a wish had come untied. He reportedly retied 78 wishes in one afternoon, guided only by echo. Whether this is true or simply poetic exaggeration remains, as always, uncertain. You pause before a particularly old bundle, a square of silk tied 3 times with a small copper coin nestled inside. You whistle toward it, soft and steady. A wind stirs just faintly. The cloth flutters, you move on. A child and her grandmother walk behind you. The child tries to mimic your whistle. Hers is too sharp. You adjust your next note to match her. She giggles. The wall says nothing but holds their laughter like a second offering. The scholars still wonder if the wall was ever considered sacred or just evolved into sacredness by being used. There is no sign to mark it. No guide points the way. And yet every monk knows it. Every novice has walked it. You keep whistling. The cloth bundles ripple like grass in a breeze. Not every knot is tight. Not every wish was meant to be. But the wall remembers all of them. And so do you. The day fades again in that quiet way the temple prefers. Not like a candle being blown out, but like ink drying slowly on rice paper. You return to the heart of the compound now, stepping once more into the main stupa circle where your journey began. You feel the difference immediately. Not in temperature, not even in light, but in gravity. There's something about returning to a place after so many turns, so many breaths, that makes you feel heavier and lighter at once. You're not alone. A few monks sit in loose formation around the base of the massive dome. A group of pilgrims prepares to begin a final twilight circuit. A dog lies on the steps, audibly dreaming. You take your place on the eastern side of the circle, near the large prayer stone with a groove worn deep by the touch of uncountable hands. You rest your palm there. It's warm, or maybe you are. You begin your final sequence of the day. This time it's not a solitary whistle, not even a pattern, it's a cycle. A full round of tones, one rising, one falling, one suspended. You've done this before, but now it feels like returning to a language you hadn't spoken in years. In historical spotlight, this outer ring of the stupa was known as literally the path of circling resonance. In temple design manuals, it was said the sound here must never be forced. It must follow the shape of the structure. A round temple deserved round sounds. Anything angular would confuse the sky. A strange temple story. A 9th century whistler once trained 3 parrots to mimic his daily tones. He claimed that on his deathbed they would continue his work. The birds did for 5 days. Then they flew into the forest, squawking something that might have been sacred or might have been parrot sarcasm. You walk slowly around the stupa now, whistling with each step. A pilgrim hears you and falls into step. Then another. Your sound becomes a tether, a path made of breaths. The sky deepens. The last light rests on the gold finial above the dome. You close the cycle with a final whistle, steady, gentle, complete. The scholars still ask what the temple whistlers meant to the rituals. Were they just breath in the background, or something more? Were they reminders of the human element in all this stone and sky? You stop walking. You let the silence bloom. And the stupa hums, not in sound but in presence. You've come full circle. And somehow, everything still feels new. Night once again, but this one feels different. There's a softness to it now, as if the temple itself knows this chapter is closing. The lamps flicker like eyelids. The stupas no longer rise, they float. And the air smells like moonlight steeped in old sandalwood and the quiet relief of completion. You're alone now, not by assignment, just by instinct. You've returned to the Whistler's Walk, an unofficial path behind the eastern shrine, not marked on any map but known to those who ever wandered long enough to feel the temple breathing. The stones here are uneven, worn, and partially overtaken by creeping moss, but they hold stories. You've added your own. You don't whistle yet, you wait, listening, to frogs, to crickets, to the wind rustling through prayer flags tied to trees by hands that might not even remember doing it. You hear the low clink of a monk's bowl as he sets it down for the night. The bark of a dog defending its nap from a squirrel. The creak of old timber remembering how to stand. Then finally you whistle. It's low, gentle, a note with no message, only memory. It rises, catches the breeze, and lingers for just a second before dissolving into the night. You continue walking, you don't count steps, your breath guides you now. The final historical note: the role of temple whistlers never appears in the royal edicts. They were rarely mentioned in inscriptions, often forgotten in scrolls, and nearly always excluded from temple murals. But here and there in marginalia, in footnotes, in offhand verses, your kind appears. Breathing, watching, sounding out the silence. The final cultural oddity. One ancient fable tells of a temple that lost all its monks to war, famine, or forgetfulness. Only one whistler remained. He stayed for years circling the stupa, whistling the rituals alone. One day, they say, the stupa began to hum back. It's probably metaphor, or it's a reminder that presence is a form of prayer even without words. You whistle again, shorter now, softer. Your breath doesn't need to stretch. The temple has heard you. The novice sees you and bows, not out of obligation, but out of understanding. You bow back. The moon is overhead. The walls breathe slower. Even the insects have thinned their chorus. You reach the final turn in the path and sit, just where the stones dip slightly inward, like a seat carved by patience. You rest your hands on your knees. You whistle once more. And then you stop. Not because you're done, but because the silence is strong enough now to hold itself. And now, dear listener, let the world dim with you. You've walked the stones, you've breathed through centuries, you've watched a temple rise and rest and rise again. You've been the unseen hand that shaped silence into ritual, the sound no one noticed until it was gone. I feel the breath in your chest, slow, steady. Let it move like the wind in the sal trees, just enough to remind you that you are here but not hurried, that you are present but not pressed. The temple is still now, the whistling has ended, but its echo lives on in the loops you've walked, in the walls you've passed, in the wishes tied softly to old stones. Close your eyes if they're not already closed. Let the night fold around you like the temple folds around its stupas, protective, ancient, unshakable. Each sound that drifts away now is an old friend taking its leave without needing to explain where it's going. I feel your weight settle like dust on warm stone. Let each muscle unclench, like prayer flags relaxing in the absence of wind. There is nothing left to do tonight. Only to be. And if tomorrow calls you to whistle again, to breathe meaning into space, do it gently, as you've done here. But for now, rest. The gods are quiet. The monks have slept. And the temple listens to your breath as if it too was sacred. A good night from whispers of history. May your dreams move like slow wind through Badhai leaves.